Good morning. This morning we are joined by another amazing human. We just keep coming across these beautiful people.
But I'm not on my own.
No, you are not. I'll fix that background up in a second, but let's get going. So we're joined by Baines Shakeshaft this morning, and he is the founder and CEO of Backtrack Youth Works in Armidale, New South Wales. He's spent the past 25 years working and living out his passion, catching wild dogs and kids. For many years, he lived in the Northern Territory, learning his trade in remote areas, learning the lessons of life in the bush, and surrounded by wise and skillful Aboriginal men and old school stockmen. In 2006, with his children growing up and forging their own paths in life, he was determined to turn his vision of working with the most disadvantaged young people in our communities into a reality. Under Bernie's leadership, Backtrack has forged a new beginning for over 1,000 young people. Bernie takes great pride in how his vision of giving young people having a hard time at life a new beginning. He's now spreading across New South Wales with mentoring in other communities to get started using the same successful tools that they've had remarkable results with in Armidale. Sounds like a very familiar story, and here to chat is Pete, so I'm going to hand over to you both to chat about that this morning.
Thank you, CT. Morning, Bernie.
Yeah, morning. My bike's frozen in the shed, mate, so I'm just sitting on the chair this morning.
So am I. I'm just bobbing my head. Looks like I'm riding, that's all.
Okay, now I get the idea.
Yeah, that's it, mate. Tell us where you grew up.
Yeah, so I grew up I was born in Sydney and then went to Orange as a pup. But most of my primary school and the start of high school was here in Armidale. But for whatever reason, we moved up to Sydney. So I finished high school in Sydney. That was a bit of a traumatic experience for me. I liken it to letting a feral cat go out of a potato sack in Sydney. It was just one of those things, had to ride through. School wasn't the place for me where I was going to do my best learning. So I just had to grit it out and make a lot of teachers grit it out as well.
And you found your way back to the bush pretty quick. And where did you head, and what was your life like in those early years out in the sticks?
Yeah, I don't think I ever knew what I wanted to do. I'm still trying to work that out now. Yeah. I went down to the snowy mountains. The animals and horses and that bush stuff was always, my place of connection. So went down there, got into a bit of trouble, got shipped onto another mate's place, bit of trouble with motor cars and police, as you do at that age when you know everything about everything. So yeah, went then down into Victoria, but it was too mundane for me. I wanted the wildlife,
Yeah.
So the guys I was working with sent me up to the Northern Territory, and that's kind of when my education started.
Yeah. And you found your right place up there?
Oh, look, I don't know that I found myself, but I found an angle to let the wildcat out. The Territory was pretty wild in the late 80s still. It's like being in a different world, really. But I liked it. It was 12 hours a day in the saddle. There was lots of drinking, lots of fighting, lots of being a young man, but I enjoyed that stuff, being wild and breaking bones and ended up in hospitals. And so I had a few pretty good years up there. Ended up getting out of the station stuff, had a child quite young, very young. So had a little spell back in New South Wales, but it was tough financially, and we were working on a farm as house parents with some pretty wild kids, much like we work with today, and a similar thing. But that fell apart. They just couldn't keep funding it. That was down near Goulburn on a sheep farm. So went back up to the Territory. So headed to Tennant Creek this time. Of course, had a partner then with a 12-month-old son. And there we were back in the Territory again. Look, in those days, it was easy to earn good money. Jane was a nurse. So she moved straight into a job, and her mum was there in Tennant Creek. And, you know, Tennant Creek's a pretty small town. It's about as dead set, you know, in the centre of Australia as you can get. I think only maybe 2,500 to 3,000 people. You know, 500 k's down to Alice Springs. So it's right bang smack in the middle of the desert, really.
Mate, what'd you learn from the Indigenous fellas about life that us city folk couldn't understand?
Yeah, look, I mean, grew up around Indigenous people from Armidale. Dad worked with a department with FACS at the time, but went to school with kids. But the territory was an eye-opener for me, you know. I remember the first lap really working with the Aboriginal stockmen up there. They were just next level, you know. There'd be maybe 16 or 17 blokes in a stock camp. 3 or 4 would be local Aboriginal guys, and the rest of us were just ring-ins from all around the countryside. But when you're in those big paddocks, it's pretty easy to get lost. You know, you're heading out in the dark, you're riding wild horses, you don't know where you are. These blokes, they never seem to get lost like us white fellas. We used to make sure you could see the guy, you know, next to you. We never really knew what we were doing or where we were going, but you're mustering big mobs of cattle as well. Yeah. The plan is that you get them moving on horses, then about lunchtime the choppers come over, and then you start collecting big mobs, you know. And so you'd see us 12 or 13 white fellas all making sure we could see each other, trying to stay on our horses. The plan at that stage was to just get home at the end of the day. And by lunchtime, when the choppers join you, well, we'd have like 20 or 30 head of cattle. And you see old Max coming from over the hill there. And of course, you know, the white fellas is pretty racist up there in those days, you know. Yeah. So people are going, look at these guys going over there for a sleep. Well, by lunchtime, Maxie would be coming over the hill. You'd see this pile of dust coming. He'd have like 1,000 head of cattle on his own. The other guy would be coming from the other direction. He'd have a similar number, and then somebody else has held up another. So all of a sudden, by the time the choppers hit you, there's about 3,000 or 4,000 head of cattle, of which we've contributed 20. So I started paying attention to these guys. What were they doing differently, you know, besides riding the wildest horses and half their gear was busted? They'd be riding in thongs, you know, and we've got all the fancy cowboy boots and shit. But those blokes knew exactly what they were doing. And I think we don't get the best out of those fellas, you know. We've been paid all these salaries. We couldn't do half of the job those blokes were doing. So I was paying attention, but in those days, you weren't allowed to talk to them, you know. The Aboriginal stockmen had to ride in the back of the truck with the animals, that sort of stuff, with the horses. It was pretty, you know, they had their own camp, they had to eat separately. You weren't allowed to talk to them, but I was watching them the whole time going, and of course I talked to them. So it starts a lot of trouble in the stock camp. But I used to follow these guys around going, when everybody else was lost, I started paying attention to what they were looking for, you know. Whenever we were lost or we didn't know where the ball was or the next yards, you know, these guys would be following the tracks. So see the kangaroo, he's gone that way in the morning because that's where the water is. He's come back in the afternoon, so we need to go the opposite direction of his tracks. So everywhere you went, these guys are just tracking stuff. And it's how they didn't get lost. So that was the start of it for me. I call that the paying attention start. And trying to learn about this racism stuff. It was pretty full on, you know. Hotels and stuff, even in my age, were split between white and black. I was always challenged with that stuff.
Yeah.
Then into Tennant Creek, and I was lucky enough to start hanging around with some really old men. And they didn't speak English. My job was working on Yanningi at the Aboriginal Medical Centre. And I used to hang around with these old men. I'd take them out bush, they'd be making boomerangs and bits and pieces. So you see them in town and you think they can hardly even walk, you know, half a block. It would take them a day. But you let these blokes go in the bush and they just disappear, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the things they showed me and the extra stuff that I don't talk about very much, but how they can see things out in front, you know, visioning. Kind of came from a pack of wild dogs. these dingoes didn't matter what direction from town we went or how far, these dingoes would be there with these old men before the old men got there or within a couple of minutes of them coming. So I'd be forever going like, how does this work? They don't have a GPS and nobody send them a text message or nothing, the dogs, but here they would show up. And it wasn't until one of my mates, a guy my age that spoke English, came out with us, and I went, man, you've got to tell me how this works because this is doing my head in. How do those dogs know where those old men are going to be before the old men get there? Anyway, I went on to have a pretty successful career in trapping, and I used a lot of those techniques. You know, those old men can touch the tracks of a dog and they can describe the dog to you, what it looks like. Just extraordinary the way in the bush and different things. And I think, you know, we all have the ability to use those same techniques, but somebody has to teach you. And we're not really learning that stuff at school. So for them, it's a really normal thing. As a white fella, it's like, this is the craziest shit I've ever seen in my life.
Is that where your deep connection to country came from, your time on these cattle yards, or do you think it was there within you, but it just needed to come out?
Look, it's there within me. There's no doubt, and I think it's in all of us, you know. That was just the conduit for letting it out and showing me different ways, you know. I'd only ever known, you know, this is how we farm, this is what we do, this is how you go about business. They take a different approach, and it's just a natural thing. So I think it's there. You've just got to have somebody that can bring it out in the right way.
Yeah. What do you reckon, you know, the old fellas, the Indigenous fellas you worked with on those, you know, stock camps, and what do you reckon they'd think of you now in your fancy suits and meeting your fancy people, going to fancy places, being awarded all these big things? What do you reckon they think of old Shakers now?
Look, I'm not much of a betting man, but I bet those old men knew what the hell that they could see what was going on out in front, you know. And it wasn't always suits for me, Pete. It was, you know, it's the later years, and I guess life keeps changing like that. And the bigger we get and the more kids we help, I guess the more you have to give of yourself, you know. I'd love nothing better than to put the jeans and the Akubra back on and head out in the paddock and be teaching kids stuff. But that's not the way it is now. But, you know, those old fellas, they knew what was going on. A few years ago, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I sat bolt upright in bed going, those old men, they weren't teaching me how to catch wild dogs. They were teaching me how to catch wild kids. Because the techniques are the same. And one of the unique things about, stop sign coming up here, one of the unique things, lost my train of thought. I'm trying to watch where you guys are riding as well. This is fantastic.
Well, this is where Matt and the boys rode, mate.
Yeah, right.
This is exactly the roads that we were on, and I'll get to that, but pay attention to my question. Bernie.
Oh, sorry. Question. What was it again?
You were talking about herding wild dogs is not much different than herding wild kids.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the unique things that puts Backtrack apart is, and I've worked for a lot of different organisations over a long period of time, what most organisations tend to do when a young busted kid comes in is they spend a lot of time in the past, you know, what's happened, unravelling the past, have they been abused, do we need to do something about that, you know, trying to solve all these problems from the past. Really good organisations will come into the now, the present time, where you're looking at all the stuff that's going on now. They're kicked out of school, in trouble with the cops, got nowhere to live. It's easy to get stuck in that space as well. What those old men in Tennant Creek taught me was, and this is a rough white fellow translation, but they spend 10% of the time looking at what those dogs were doing yesterday, just on the tracks, seeing what it's there. They do nothing more with it. 10% of the time what the dog's doing right now, because they're working out where they're going to be, but 80% is out in front. Where do they want those dogs tomorrow? And I think that was the message that sat me bolt upright in bed going, oh man, those old men, they'd already taught me before we started doing it, how to work with these kids. So what we do is when a new kid comes in, a quick look at what's going on in the background, because we want to know, you know, where all this mess has come from. But we can't change any of that, Pete. So it's a ridiculous notion to sit back there, because it doesn't matter what your intentions are, you're not going to change what's happened. If you look at what's going on with them now, kicked out of school, in fights all the time, drug and alcohol, mental health, all the myriad of issues that these kids come with, it's kind of easy to get stuck there as well. But it's a hard kind of thing to shift. But once we start going 80% out in front, what is it we want for these kids?
Yeah.
If you ask a kid that comes into Backtrack what's important to them, they'll say the same stuff as us, family and friends. You know, kids will say, we don't talk about you want to have a job. We want to have enough money to get by in the world. You want to do something that's meaningful. When we make those big, clear, muddly goals out in front, that we want good people, we want them to not be dependent on welfare. We want them to raise kids, to help out in the community, and to do something meaningful with their lives. What they do doesn't really matter. And for many of us, we work that out as we go along. You know, not many kids really go at 16 or 17, that's what I want to be, a dentist or a fireman. And I think by putting pressure on kids that we do these days of going, you know, you've got to decide by the year 12, what is it you're going to do in life? What do you want to study at university? What are you going to be? I think it's a problem that creates, you know, a lot of angst and a lot of failure. So by having those long range visions that are quite broad and generic, you know, you want to be happy, you want somewhere safe to live, you want to have enough money to get by, you want to do something that's meaningful. It doesn't matter how you get there, and that's life's journey. But if you get there, so, you know, if a kid says he wants to be a fireman, and let's say he ends up being a school teacher and he's way happier being a school teacher, somewhere in the subconscious, he's failed because he didn't become a fireman. And I think society, the way we're bringing up kids at the moment, is we set them up for failure after failure. And you know, we're breaking down humans, whereas we should be lifting them up.
Yeah. Mate, we had a chat yesterday with a guy by the name of Steve Pawlowski, and he directs movies and produces and writes and so forth. And he spent 2 years writing the story behind the Milperra biking massacre, and spent a lot of time with the banditos and comancheros. And he said for a lot of them, it was about finding their tribe, about finding people where they belonged, you know. And it's what you started saying there, is what the kids come is they just want to be, you know, cared for. They want to matter. So my question to you, Bernie, is why do these kids matter to you?
A village to raise a child, and I live in a village. Somebody has to do it. I guess, Pete, if I was to look back and reflect on it, when I was toughing it out as a young fella, what was it that got me through, you know?
Yeah.
Pretty much it was older, sensible role models in my life that gave me direction, that didn't judge. And so I can empathise with where a lot of these kids are at.
Yeah.
And we've got a problem in this country. In 2014, there was a report came out where it estimated that 1 in 5 kids in Australia, so nationally in Australia, a first world country, 1 in 5 kids under the age of 17 don't do anything. They don't go to school, they don't have a job, they're in no kind of training. They're drifting and they're lost. And I think as a human, you know, and as part of a town or a city or a country or a world, we all have responsibilities to do a little bit more. And when I
want to stop you there, because you talk about the size of the problem. You talk about how how you resonate and so forth. And you talk about a society, how we all want to do more. And I'm sure if you surveyed everyone and said, would you like to help these kids, they'd say yes, but they don't. Because if parents, you know, had hugged these kids, had been there for them, if the community had been there as they talk about they want to or they should, well, there'd be no need for you to exist.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, I understand the need, I understand, what you can do, but why you? Why these kids? Because if there's 1 in 5, you're not going to be able to help a big percentage. So why do these kids matter? And why you? We all have a sense of responsibility and obligation.
Mm.
We don't do it because if we did, there wouldn't be the problem. So why you?
Oh, look, I remember as a young fella going, I worked it out very early on in life, going, if you're going to do something, let's call it work, and it's going to be something like 75% of your waking life, then you better enjoy doing it. And I don't just enjoy it. I don't even see that I have a job. I have a life. I kick the door down every morning to get out there. Why me? So there's a selfish component. I really enjoy what I do. I know that we're very, very good at it, and that there's a need there, and I can get paid. I also think that I was given so much by Indigenous people that I feel that I've got something to give back, that I can bring from both worlds. I can sit on the fence with Indigenous old school ways and white fellow ways. What is it? It's a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
I love doing it. I'm very good at doing it. I get paid to do it. I go, happy days for me,
Mate,
and it's meaningful.
Yeah, of course. Tell me how you feel when you're sitting on the ground around the campfire. You got these dogs at your feet, kids running around everywhere. It's a cold night. The fire's burning bright. The stars are covering the sky. How's Bernie Shakeshaft feel then?
Look, that's where I'm most at home, Pete. That's my dreaming. It's where I feel most comfortable. I feel like I'm doing something constructive. If I was to have a job in a computer factory, I think I would go home not feeling real good about myself. But I love it, and I love watching these kids grow and develop. I think there's some other stuff probably that crept in along the way. For the first 2 or 3 years, everyone went, "You're a lunatic. There's no way this is possible. So you can't do it." Once I start hearing things like, "You can't do it. These kids are not worth it." I go, you know what? I was one of those kids that wasn't worth it. And somebody bloody well put their hand up, and without me knowing, like our kids don't know. And it's really easy stuff to do. I get big paychecks every time I see a kid that I haven't seen for a few years come past and say, "Thanks, you saved my life. You've changed it." He's now pushing his own pram. We get big paychecks. Or when the boys come back from the bike ride in Thailand, because got to be honest, man, we were punching above our weight class there. We didn't think we were going to get those kids over there, or they would have any chance in hell of doing the 800 kilometres.
Yeah, mate. Well, we'll get to that. And I know when you talk about a big paycheck, it's a metaphor there. Tell me about the relationship between the kids and the dogs.
Animals, let's wake up as humans, and we think we've got our shit together and it's all sorted. How many people do you see just with a dog? If I was to walk into a classroom of kids that had never met me, let the dog go in first, do you reckon I'd have their attention? Yeah. Absolutely. We work with some of the most violent kids in our community, yet I've never seen anyone hit a dog. They'll hit each other, don't bother, but they won't hit a dog. What is it? I think that the dogs give us really good lessons that we can take, and because we're so smart as humans, we would never listen to an animal, for example. But the dog doesn't judge. So when a kid comes in to backtrack for the first time, we just let a pile of dogs go and watch what happens. Just, I don't know, people that haven't seen it before go, "This is some kind of magical thing." Well, it isn't. It's just animals, and they've been around in their lives the whole time. Dogs are the closest part to my heart, So we could use horses or cows or pigs or chickens or guinea pigs or whatever, but dogs are the big one for me. But when a kid comes in, the dog doesn't judge. He doesn't care whether he's been in jail or not. He doesn't care what colour his skin is, whether. So he takes them in that moment, and it's a beautiful place to start with a kid, because when they come in, they've got to get a fresh start with us. The first message is you can't get kicked out. The second is we're not going to judge you, but the way you treat that dog is how that dog will treat you. That's a pretty cool way to start and go, we don't care about all the stuff that's behind you, what's gone on in past relationships with cops or parents or school teachers or siblings, and we care about where you're at now. It also does something for the kid that runs away all the time. It's way harder to run away if you've got a dog in your hand and you want the dog to be with you. It's hard to climb one of those fences with the cops chasing you when you've got a dog, a Great Dane stuck in your hand. So there are some youth work tricks. The other thing is there are only 2 local government areas in New South Wales with juvenile crime stats with long-term downward trends. Armidale is smashing it out of the ballpark, down almost 40%. Everything else is rising. Why is it? It's because of those bloody dogs. What we do is, except for the corona period, we take the kids away competing in all sorts of dog events, and we're pretty good. You know, we won world records and Australian titles with these black and white kids with their black and white dogs. But the craft of it, and it was always pretty simple, was, and I don't care what town you go to, Friday and Saturday nights will be your hotspots, kids in trouble and out and drinking and carrying on the streets. When we take, I think there's a figure that says 20% of the kids will do 80% of the damage. You take those 20% of kids out of town, give them something meaningful and purposeful to do, take them out of town on those high risk times, Friday and Saturday nights. This is not rocket science. Everything we do is, hey presto, this is really simple stuff. Let's get back to the simple stuff. With big people caring for little people, take them away at the time of highest need or crisis, and it's a no-brainer. Down comes the juvenile crime stats. But we did that, Pete, as a group of volunteers probably for the first 10 years. And you well know how much effort you put in for other things and the commitment to it. But the results are extraordinary. And whether it's boy, girl, black, white, those dogs just form a connection. And then we show them some old school stuff. If people have ever seen our dog things, you can see it on YouTube's and on the web page and stuff, but we do teach the dogs this dog Valium. So it's where we chill the dogs out, almost put them into an unconscious state. It's a bit like meditation. So the kids, they're practicing doing that on the dogs, and guess what's going on with the kids? While the dog's chilled out, so's the damn kid. And then we're teaching them all sorts of different things about energy. You know, we teach them rubbing your hands together, feel that, don't care what you call it, but is it a real thing, you know? So we take them into worlds that I guess we should be teaching kids at school, but we don't. We teach arithmetic and you know, trigonometry, and we teach our kids other stuff around energy, looking out for each other. What is the most important thing in your life? If you asked any kid that's come through there over the years to describe Backtrack in a word or two, I'm going to bet that the majority of answers will come down to some form of belonging connection. You know, it's like a second family. It's where I feel safe. It's friends. It's that collection. So belonging.
Mate, what's the likelihood that when some of these kids turn up for the first time, they're introduced to the dogs? What's the likelihood that that relationship they form with those dogs is the most meaningful and least destructive relationship that some of them have known in their lives?
It's an interesting question, but I think straight away, and you have to be onto it quickly, you know, how you treat them and what's going on. I think they're a conduit for forming relationships with other people that are there at Backtrack, whether they're big or small people. But they do something different. They give kids opportunities that they hadn't maybe thought of before. We did a little project a few months ago where a kid just had to walk around, take a photo of anything, and then talk about the meaning for their life, whether it was a road sign or whatever, you know. That's how you get to your final destination. One of the kids, a young girl, took this, it's the saddest photo, but she's sitting there with one of our oldest dogs that's been around this stuff. And the dogs know what we're asking them to do, don't worry. And her little caption said, you can tell a dog anything, and they will never, ever tell somebody.
Yeah.
So I think we underestimate kids and what they're looking for and what they need, and you know, and those dogs are great, whether it's high energy, whether it's sitting and chilling, they're winners.
Yeah. Mate, when I first visited Backtrack, you know, I came to Armidale and we had dinner together, and I knew bugger all about, some would say anything, but I knew bugger all about Backtrack, and came out that next morning before I flew to Sydney, and, you know, if I can describe the overall sense, walking through the gates, meeting kids, in one word, it would be respect.
Mm-hmm.
The respect that I felt from the kids for the place, for the big people, as you call them, for people arriving. And I was just shocked, Bernie, to walk in and these kids had never seen me and put their hand out, look you in the eye and greet you. And not in a way that they've been schooled that they have to, but in a real meaningful way. And, you know, for a lot of the kids, respect's not something that they would have felt. I wouldn't have thought for many of them before they get to Backtrack. Why does that culture exist?
I think as in any workplace or town or community, we're all responsible for the culture. We're really clear what we want at Backtrack. And so we've just built that culture. And, you know, some of the best lessons that you learn, I think, as a young person, not taught, as you said, Pete. Don't sit there and go, right, this is the way you introduce someone and rah, rah. But they see us do it, and they learn by watching, and they learn by not being judged. So I think, yeah, you know, it's a culture that the kids are equally responsible for. At Backtrack, it freaks people out, particularly when you bring like a principal of the school or a grandma in, and the first thing that the kid hears is that there's no rules down here at Backtrack. People freak out going, my God, look at these kids you got, and you've got no rules. How's this going to work? But what we have are agreements. So we sit down with the young people and we go through and go, if we're going to have a place here, the kids come from north, south, east and west, from all over. You know, you can have a kid from the North Shore in Sydney, or a kid from 12-year-old kid from Tennant Creek, as well as our local kids. So there's a big mix of kids of different ages, different backgrounds, all of them suffering and hurt. But they come up with these agreements, and we must use it in the young people's language or it doesn't work. But they have things like, and I think this could apply to any workplace, when you walk through those gates, you leave your shit at the gate.
Yeah.
Nobody's here to judge anyone. You wouldn't see these kids hanging around together down the street, but when you see them there at Backtrack, they're almost like their own little family. They leave their shit at the gate. We don't mind them swearing, but you can't swear at someone. So we just starting to take these little inches, you know. So all the agreements are the same things we would come up with. The first one they'll say always is, oh, you've got to have respect. Well, that's a big fancy word and that's very nice, but tell me what that means. I want to see it in 3D, where you don't punch any bastard in the head. Right, are we all agreed here that you don't punch any bastard in the head? So they're the types of agreements that we have. And it's a pretty simple thing then, because we're not the police, we're not your parents, we're not the school teacher, we're not telling you what to do. These are the things that you kids came up with. We're just going to help you keep that on track. And it works. I think I've only seen 2 or 3 dust-ups in 15 years of, as I say, the most violent kids in our community.
I think there's plenty of messages there that could exist within corporate Australia to improve the workplaces there. Mate, I want to ask you, this year in January, we were really privileged to have 2 of the boys and Matt come and join us in Thailand for the bike ride. And it was, as you alluded to, a process to get the kids to Thailand. they funded their own way, or Backtrack certainly funded their way, and I'm guessing it was a new experience for them, being on one of those big planes, flying across to Bangkok, and then being associated with a group of people never met before, a long way from Backtrack. Talk me through what the kids were going through before they flew out. What were they feeling? What was being exhibited? What did you see? What did you hope for them?
We love taking on big challenges, and for us, I think going into it, we didn't realise how difficult it would be. The kids certainly didn't, but we understood that they wouldn't get that, not until they sat on the bike over there and went, right, here it is, it's starting. So highly complex. We handpicked those kids both for a reason, at the right time, for the right thing. Tom needed to work on some lots of issues, and Alex, he's never really had a go at anything and followed through and finished. So we saw it as a great opportunity. Matt Pett, he's only been with us for a year and a half. He's a carpenter. He doesn't know much about youth work, but he wanted to do something more and something more meaningful. And now look at the job he's doing. So he's a bit of a bike enthusiast anyway, and loves the challenge. So with a new worker and these kids, I thought there's a challenge that, boy, it's got plenty of options to fail all over it. Fair income, trying to get those kids just to ride the bikes. We were trying everything. Everybody going out and riding with the kids through but trying to do stuff on weekends. And you've got to remember that the families they're coming from, they're not necessarily supporting us.
Yeah.
Get through that process. And they had no idea what they were going into. They've never been out in New South Wales, probably, let alone to a different country. And then with them, a whole mob of strangers, people they've never met before. We live in Armidale, it's going to snow here today. It's bloody cold. But I only just have to do a quick Google and go, boy, it's not going to be bloody cold over there where you guys are. So trying to talk those things through and go, you've got to be match fit, guys. You can't be just drinking that fizzy drink shit and eating crap food. You're going to need, to get your bum in the saddle and get your legs a bit toughened up. Anyway, we just had to keep changing the plan, going, whatever. We're trying to get them to do stuff. Matt was getting pretty cranky by the end of it, going, you boys have got to ride, So instead of work, we used to take them out of town, like 20 Ks of a morning, wherever we had time before work started or whatever, tip them off on the bike and go, I don't care how long it takes you. I'm not going to ride along beside you, listening to you whinge and complain about how hard it is and you've got a flat tire. Go and sort the shit out. So that worked pretty well as a technique to go, if you want lunch, you've got to get back. And if you hitchhike and get a lift in, I tell you what, love, punches will start then. So I think a few of those things going, the closer it got, the more the intensity, the pressure you could build. You watch them go quieter and quieter. And then it was kind of up to Matt to go, hop on the plane, good luck, and see you on the other side. But once you see kids going really quiet, you go, well, so it's a risk, but I know about, risk, but it's kind of like, this could really work or it could really not work.
Yeah.
Thanks to all the support and the people, and it really worked. It was pretty extraordinary to watch those kids come back, and even just seeing the photos and bits and pieces. And Matt says he handled it all pretty well. I'll bet he didn't. I'll bet there were some days over there where he was ready to push those kids off the first hill, but got them back. And lovely to hear those stories, and I love the way. It's back to that thing, that mentoring or whatever you want to call it, but older people normally drift in. We're naturally built to do it, to raise young people. It's part of what we do. And I know that happened over there, seeing those guys riding along, CEOs and executives, they've got no idea. It could have been a brickie from Gyra, they don't really get who the people are, but I like that opening their eyes.
It was really interesting, mate. As you know, I got there late because of the bushfires that were licking at our heels at our property, and so I flew in a few days late. But you know, I got to see you know, the boys portray the toughness and the disengagement that they thought was the kind of cool thing they had to do. And then I saw them at Band Home Hug with these tiny kids who, you know, their home is just like Backtrack, you know, and I saw the impact it had on those boys, but more importantly, the impact, well, not more importantly, additionally, the impact it had on our group. You know, it was such a real privilege to have the boys from Backtrack, and we had two of the guys from the Rising Foundation from New Zealand, and their hands and all come together, and it was a pretty remarkable thing. And you know, obviously a lot of courage on your behalf to say yes and let it occur, because as you say, it could have gone pear-shaped, but I speak to everyone on that ride, and it will remain a very special and unique experience, truly understood only by those on that ride. But it'd be nice to think that each day you get out of bed, stick your boots on, you put that cape on, and you fly on down to Backtrack in Armidale there, and just like Superman, you solve all the problems. But that doesn't happen. Some of the kids don't make it. How do you feel about that?
Gee, I've been to my share of funerals.
Yeah.
How do I feel? I feel like should have got out of bed a bit earlier, should have paid attention, should have worked a bit harder. We like 100% success rate, and I get that that's not ever going to be possible. Breaks my heart, makes me sad, makes me want to work harder. I just go, you know, I hate it. We've had suicide attempts. We've got one kid got locked up last week. When you're doing your absolute everything, or you think you are, and they put a kid behind bars, I say that's not good enough, and there have got to be better ways. So I think it makes me sad, but it drives me harder as well.
There's when you do what you do, when you excel at something, there's a risk that you focus on what you can do better. You focus on the sole criticism or the sole kid that's slipped through, that hasn't made it. And you can miss the opportunity to celebrate the victories and acknowledge what you have done. How do you reconcile, you know, the loss of one of the kids against the difference that you've made to hundreds of kids who've gone through Backtrack? But not just those kids, Bernie, the generation of kids that will follow from these kids as they turn into young adults, parents have their own children. You've kept them out of jail or kept them alive. Do you take time to privately, because I know you don't do it publicly, you have to do these Australian of the Year things and so forth, but sitting around that campfire with Francesca, do you take time to acknowledge and let in the good you've done, the lives that you've saved and changed forever?
Look, I could write a bit of a poem and go, yeah, I sit around doing that sort of shit all the time, but I don't. You know, do we take time? Do we talk about it? I think it's so busy and such on a razor's edge, the stuff that we're doing all the time, that it's kind of tough to do that for me anyway. And you know, we've got a lot of people on the payroll, a lot of kids now. We've got programs running in different towns. There's plenty of times. Francesca knows when the cracks are showing, when I get on my horse and go for a ride at midnight, and might not come back till the sun's up, you know. That's kind of where I do it.
Is that because you got lost, you didn't pay attention, or is it?
I think it's when I switch off and I just go, and I don't worry about where I end up. I just go, and it seems to be the right thing.
Yeah. Mate, there must be a real balance between, you know, the call to expand backtrack into, you know, rural areas across not only New South Wales, but across the country. And the model is just so sound and so obvious that you question why it hasn't been done. But, you know, the question or the opportunity to expand and grow, how do you balance that with not expanding, you know, beyond what you can do to ensure the DNA that makes backtrack so special isn't diluted, doesn't become too big that you lose what's so special? How do you find that balance?
Yeah, Pete, it's a real tricky one. We've been chipping away at that for about 7 or 8 years now. I guess all our biggest funders go, come on, where's the replication? What's the scalability? We work with some pretty incredible businessmen, and we've had a few goes, you know. The main school of thought is it's just a franchise thing, like McDonald's, mate. You just pick it up, plonk it in another town. We had a go at that down in another rural town, and we got the program going, and we could show the crime stats, and we had the kids showing up, and we were doing all the work in the first 12 months. But it nearly killed me. Leaving here at 4 o'clock in the morning, not getting home till 10 o'clock at night, and then the Armidale program's not going as well because we're not focusing on that. So we stepped off that, licked our wounds, and went, there has to be a better way. And I don't do giving up very well. So we've just kept chipping away. But there are two things now. So we got programs running Windsor on the edge of Sydney, out at Broken Hill, in Dubbo, Lake Cargelligo, more east down Grafton. It's starting to get a roll, but we've kept it small and quiet. The way forward for us, and this is where I believe we really can start to impact a whole lot more kids, is we don't own the business. It's not Backtrack. We just help that community set up whatever it is that works best for them. So there are only two simple things that we look for when we're going, will we commit time and effort into helping these guys get going? One is that there's a driver, there's a Bernie in the community. It's not a job, it's a way of life. They're going to be there no matter whether they get paid or whether they don't. But you've got to have someone at the top end of town as well, whether it's the Commissioner of Police or the Mayor or the Director of Education. You've got to have someone in a high point that will help push some of the garbage rules, legislation to the side for a minute while they get some traction. We're riding a winner here.
Mate, it's been fascinating, it's been insightful, and it's been a real privilege to chat with you. Walking into Backtrack that day had an impact on me that I'll never forget, and so eternally grateful to have met you and now call you a friend. And mate, I hope that in 15, 20 years' time, when you're sitting around that campfire with Francesca, there's some dogs at your feet, fires burning, skies are clear, that you do take the time, just privately, to acknowledge the enormous impact that you've created. And you'll never understand that true impact. You'll never understand the kids and community beyond that's been positively impacted by your very actions. And I don't seek an answer from you because I know you too much humility there, but I wonder how these other programs can exist without burning. Love to all at Backtrack, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend the morning with you. I know that you'll probably crawl back into bed now, and Francesca will bring you a bowl of porridge and a coffee and rise about 10 a.m. So thanks for getting up early for us today. I'll hand back to CT to wind it up. Thanks, mate.
Thanks for having me. Good luck to you all, guys.
Pleasure, mate.
Thank you, and thanks so much, Bernie. There's some amazing comments coming up in the chat there. I don't know if you can see all of those, but you know, we've got a few riders on there as well that rode with the boys, and I think, you know, I speak on behalf of everyone. They were such a delight to have on the ride, and you know, I think we watched them come into the ride such shy, socially awkward, and you know, very reserved, and by the end of the ride, I think they were giving out the biggest hugs. You know, they were such beautiful boys, and I hope that they're doing really well. So thank you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good on you. Terrific. And the boys are going really well. both right on track, and you know, and thanks to all you guys that support Hands Across the Water, because the work that they're going is pretty special, and you know, it's the average punter that keeps us in the game and gives us a chance to do what we do. So thanks for having me on this morning, and I'm glad I didn't have to do that pedaling thing, man. That looks like hard work. You're sweating, I'm drinking coffee.
I love it. I love it. So look, team, coming up tomorrow morning, we've got we're going to be joined by a guy called Rupert Guinness, who he's one of Australia's most respected cycling journalists, and he is currently riding 5,000 kilometres?
4,600 kilometres in the race across America.
Yes, virtually. So yeah, I just shake my head at that.
Yeah, he's on a spin bike in the Mercedes dealer at Monavale. He hasn't left the showroom yet, so I reckon he needs to pedal a bit harder. But Tomo's going to have a chat to him.
Yeah. So that'll be a good chat tomorrow. And obviously later this week, we've just got more and more amazing guests coming up. So thanks everyone for jumping on this morning. Thanks for your commitment to the ride, and we shall see you all tomorrow morning. Thanks again, Bernie.
See everyone.
Okay, good on you guys. Cheers. Ciao.